says SCH additional universes. What do you think that type of language means, or do you know what that means?
That's most likely. I don't want to speak for, this invoice. It's certainly all these invoices are a mess, but universe would suggest additional names of voters.
So this being a price being paid for, from your experience, for voter list or for curating voter list as to who to send things to.
Could have been.
Okay. But it's not buried in the other line item,
No.
it's a separate line item.
Well, we don't, I've actually never seen an invoice like that has additional universes. It could have been sent out later, after, the piece was already checked in. I'm just not for sure of the circumstance.
Okay, and then if you go back and look at Exhibit 11, which is another one that Mr. O'Brien directed you to, he said that he made the statement that his exhibits A and B that are there were for media. But do you see on this list some things that media, meaning TV and radio? Do you see some things on these lists that are not TV and radio oriented?
Well, stickers, for example, stickers.
Okay.
Let's see.
Or down at the bottom, there's several.
Okay, yeah, palm cards, postcards,
Mail.
signs, mail, which, just mail, which is bizarre, but.
Okay, so then you would agree that there are items on that invoice that are not radio and TV oriented?
Correct.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions.
Commissioner Lindbergh, question?
I had, well, Mr. Hicks just answered one of mine that I had, and that was about the additional universities, and then the question for him, he just answered that. But I do have one for Mr. Caraway also. And Mr. Caraway, you didn't get to respond, but you had, during your testimony, Mr. Hicks asked you on Exhibit A on the 39,000, and then on the 20,000. And you had, I believe you said, words to the effect that you know why the bill went from 39 to 20. But I never heard an explanation on that. Could you talk about that, please?
Sure. I believe I testified sometime in 2021. I'm sorry, I can't remember the month exactly, August, September, it's all a blur, time period. Members started to call me. Remember my previous life as a caucus director of House Republicans. Oftentimes I was their first call for political problems or issues. And so calls started to come into me from across the state from members who had gotten collection notices from Mr. Goldstein. We obviously waited some time to see if there were any more, cure period, let's wait to see if any more come in. Obviously contacted House leadership. House leadership retained one of our attorneys. I'm sorry, I don't remember which one. We had a few law firms here in town that we worked with and sought guidance on how to pay these bills. First of all, it's very strange for a political, an invoice for services rendered to be sent basically a year and a half, as I remember, after the actual event had occurred. So there were some questions about campaign finance, amending reports, how do you do this, that, or the other. The other thing that Mr. Lyle was unique was these invoices went out, and in many cases, well, several cases, I'm not going to say many, the invoice had already been paid by the candidate committee. It was almost like, I obviously don't want to guess, but someone just turned over a bunch of bills and said, well, here, collect on these, but no one had actually input when members had paid those bills in 2018 or 2020. It was a mess. The other thing that occurred is some members destroyed the products that Mr. Longstreth had sold them following his arrest in 2020. So we had yard signs and literature, and members were not comfortable in using those because, they came from his era, so they destroyed them, threw them away, whatever, and reprinted. So we obviously made sure that Goldstein's group could justify every expenditure, everything that they sent a bill for. First we asked the member or the candidate, do you have, or do you remember seeing any of these products? Or did you take the service? You took the service, you gotta pay for it. And so they could, in this particular case, they could prove, the bill collector, Mr. Goldstein, could prove, I asked Representative Schmidt to go through her file at home. She had a couple of mailers, but she had no idea which ones they were at the time. They could prove that the 20,000, I'm sorry, I can't see that. Those, they could absolutely prove without a shadow of a doubt that that service was performed, and Schmidt-Rowe Highway wrote the check. All the campaigns, including Representative Schmidt, were advised not to pay the bill until Mr. Goldstein's group could prove, or the member could, say, yeah, I took that service. I hope that answers your question.
Can I ask one additional redirect?
Based on that question? Go ahead.
Can you look in the book at Exhibit S?
Under what tab?
1026 S,
Okay.
the last of my exhibits.
1026?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that, way back in there, it's a duplicate of it somewhere else, but on page 16, it has that $39,000 invoice there. It says page 16 at the bottom.
Oh, page 16, okay.
Yeah, there's numbers, there's page numbers at
Okay,
the bottom.
I see it.
So the 39,000. So it says, you see there's a series of numbers, 001P, 002P, 003P, 4P, 5P, 6P, 7, and less. Okay? You would agree that that's what's listed on that invoice?
Yes.
Okay? Now flip back to the beginning of Exhibit S. And I know you said that you couldn't read the little codes down at the bottom,
It's up here.
but I put them,
It's on-
so assume I didn't make a mistake.
Yeah.
I put those little codes on the pages also,
I see that.
and I just want to flip through them and then have you respond. There's 001P, 002P, 003P, 004P, 005P, 006P, 007P, okay? All of the nomenclature of that invoice. Would you say that these existed? That these happened? These mailers
Object to use the word quote happen.
were mailed, were created? Anything? What would you say about these mailers?
Based upon the information that Mr. Goldstein provided Representative Schmidt, they could prove that they mailed, 20,283, not 39,122.
So in the Freeman matter, were you aware of any mail pieces that were not approved by Mr. Freeman directly through text or
Object
through email?
as to Mr. Freeman, and
Sustained, not part of this case.
it's also not follow up to
To the question, right.
To the question.
Last question.
So on the letter page, which is page 15, you testified to that before. Did that happen? Do you believe that got distributed to voters?
What page?
We were in the same exhibit. Exhibit S, page 15.
Was it the Jennifer Black?
Yeah.
Yeah, however, I'm nearly certain that appeared on the campaign finance report as an in-kind, right? No?
It's on the
Oh, I see.
it's on the $39,000 invoice.
Okay, I see.
found an object to identifying the invoice with that specific letter. All we have on the invoice is SCH-LTR. We had nothing whatsoever to connect that part of the invoice to the Jennifer Black letter.
Yeah, my apologies.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions.
Thank you.
done with Mr. Caraway?
Yeah.
I do have
Go
one
ahead.
question.
Sorry, Mr. Knight.
Trying to ask it, and if it's appropriate for the witness. So, the one thing that seems to be missing from all of this, from my perspective, is an engagement letter, right? I mean, typically, as a, at least my firm's consulting, and everybody's I've seen, or actually any services, lawyers, accountants, or you name it, there is an engagement letter that spells out how you're going to get paid and what services you would provide, such that, right, if this, you know, if you thought that mailers were out of ballpark of that, you would call and say, hey, based on our contract, our agreement, this doesn't fit. I guess my question is, I mean, is that how these engagements with candidates and campaigns are typically done? I understand this year's would have been with, you know, GPL, but I would have expected GPL would have had an engagement agreement with all the candidates it worked with. I mean, I guess my question is that the way the industry typically works? Is that how you typically work with your clients? That's the missing piece for me. We're talking all these ways you could bill, all of which are plausible, but I'm not seeing an agreement that would have defined that, and that should have been in place, I think.
Mr. Commissioner, I've never personally seen an engagement or a scope of work with campaign. There oftentimes are budgets at the very beginning. However, budgets, they fluctuate based on polling or circumstance of the race. You will tell a candidate, hey, we think this is going to cost $150,000, and then the candidate needs to go and work to raise as much money as possible to pay those bills, but they do fluctuate. I have ballparked many times, whether it be a township trustee candidate or a candidate for the legislature, to say, hey, I think this is going to cost X amount, but it does fluctuate, and I am not aware. I'm sure it happens, but in my world of House Republicans, we never had any kind of an engagement letter.
Is it verbal? I mean,
Mostly
how do
because-
you know what is it just kind of understood? You're gonna do mailers and stickers, and I mean, how do you know what the engagement's going to involve? So you can ballpark it, and you verbally express the ballpark
Yeah,
estimate?
particularly when House Republicans or Senate Republicans, whomever the hierarchy is, when they're making the decision of who the vendor is. For example, I made decisions along with House, obviously I was an employee, but the membership of the House, the leadership of the political caucus, on my recommendation, would use a particular vendor. If that member chose to go and use their own vendor, oftentimes they're out of the family. So we don't take care of that for them. And the reason why we do that, Commissioner, is it's very simple. In my case, this time last year, thank God it's over, spent a whole year, I was running almost 70 races simultaneously. If I had to deal with 70 different consultants, it's just impossible for a small staff of 3 or 4 or 5 people to do that. That's why we look to streamline everything to 1 or 2 or 3 vendors.
That's fair. Thank you.
And then, are you finished with everything with Mr. Caraway, or would you like, I don't want to excuse him if you might.
I think he could be excused.
Okay, thank you. You're Susan. Thank you. At this time, can we please take a 5-minute break? Do what?
Your boss is calling.
Yeah, you're the boss.
Wait. Do you want a new 20 minutes?
Yeah, I just.
Okay. All right, so we need a 20-minute break. It's 12:42, so let's be back around 1 for the block drink.
Recall Ms. Fitzmartin, just,
Yes, I think so.
okay, is she the next witness?
Do you know?
No, you're not gonna recall.
I don't have a lot of
She was
options here.
released, you're not gonna recall.
No, don't say
Unless
I don't
we're-
believe she was.
Well, it doesn't matter. She is.
Oh.
I know, I almost don't know, so it's like, oh,
Okay.
yeah. I can relate to that. Only mine would have to be like maybe unanimous.
All right, I will do my best to remember to separate that. And recommendation for.
Chris, when you need- Where's Chris when you need him?
I thought about that yesterday.
I did too.
I was hoping that about this point, we would have like a 45, so we could get something, but I guess that's not gonna happen.
Right,
Yeah, I told yes.
okay.
And he said, okay. But then I said, I was probably going to recall the Schmidt. And he said, well, if you do that, I'll object to that. So I think that means he's good with, at the present, he's good with Miss
Okay.
Fitzmartin. So somebody needs to tell him. She
Oh,
said she was on standby. So
Okay.
he sent me in.
okay. All right, I thought Ron might, but I will reach out. There's one behind me.
I think I probably
There's one
have,
over there.
let me see, let me just double check. Yeah. You know,
That
Might-
would
is there one
require
outside?
somebody to empty it.
That would require somebody to
there might
empty
be
it.
one outside.
Versus clean up garbage, you just throw it.
Out the window.
I had a client once that centralized all their garbage in one area. And it was supposed to dissuade people from printing things,
No,
because of they couldn't throw away paper under their desk anymore. It didn't work. What it did do is it caused there to be a great deal of water cooler conversation around the trash room, because now everybody converges on this area and shoots the shit for a while every time they're throwing something away.
that's funny.
No, thank you. Appreciate the output.
Did you get a bite to eat?
Now I'm good.
Okay. Jonathan Bonanza down there.
Like I said before, at least they always work down there. I've never had one not work
Oh, that's good.
down there.
My credit card or my debit card won't go through.
Oh,
Never.
It's much warmer in here than out there.
I know, it's freezing.
you can open a window maybe.
Wow.
Has anybody here ever been to Colombia? Colombia?
No, I have not. I would love to go
Yeah.
someday.
When I used to do a lot of international consulting with people like IBM and Samsung, I went to Colombia like 3 times. And in Bogota, the buildings have no AC or heat because the temperature is like the same all year round. The average temperature is like 69 degrees. So I asked somebody like, what do you do if you had a cold snap? And their answer was, we have a thing we call a blanket. But you'd be in offices like this, even in big buildings, and there's no ventilation system. So it'd all be like open the window things.
Even this tall up?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my.
I mean, they wouldn't open like where you could fall out, but they would like cantilever.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's why that's like, I had nothing to do with the narcotics business there, but I think that it's the fact that they have like 70 degrees year round and it's always overcast. It's like some sort of like utopian drug growing or cocaine growing.
What do they grow there?
Legally coffee.
Right, well, that's what I meant.
Yeah, so
I could think of.
Coffee, strawberries, some other fruits. Most of it's on, I've been there on an agricultural trip. And a lot of their new growing is done, also flowers.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
The number one producer of flowers in the United States to sell is Kroger. And they get about 80% of their flowers from India. And when they grow them, the buds have like a little wrap on it. And that, as the flower grows, and they're mostly grown in an interior place, the bud continues to grow with the flower. Then they ship it to the United States to Kroger, and that is still held tight. And when Kroger finally puts it in the grocery store, they cut all of those things off. That's why the flower stays whole. It's an amazing process. And Uribe was the president about 15 years ago. When he became president, the cartel and the other, I can't remember, the cartel and another group really controlled a lot of the hinterland by force and money. They would come in and they'd say to you, get all this group here together and we'll pay them, blah, blah, blah. This is what the cartel would do. And so what Uribe said was, we're going to give you an education, we're going to give you a livelihood. And in the livelihood and the education, they really focused on agriculture. And it really worked. And then when Santos was elected, he continued it. Now, I haven't really followed it since that time, but it's become a much better country because of the investment in giving people a job.
Oh, makes sense.
Still has some problems with drugs. I mean, that's not going to go away, but holding a community hostage with the drugs is being ruled at.
That's interesting.
But yeah, your flowers at Kroger's probably came from Colombia.
That's cool.
Just bought some the other day.
I mean, you'd think they came from here. but no.
My experience there is all the IBM people I used to work with there was that the number one thing that changed the culture was the U.S. trained their military. And there's actually 2 different distinct groups. There's the cartels that do drugs and they don't want any trouble. They don't want any fighting. They don't want any shooting. And there's guerrillas. And the guerrillas were the ones that, like, if you were a US citizen and you went there, you had to be worried about, because the guerrillas' common tactic was to kidnap Westerners and then hold them for ransom. So the army basically principally eliminated the guerrillas, because if you think about it, the guys doing the drugs, even though they're criminals, they don't want trouble. They want to, the guerrillas were the ones that made it unsafe to go between cities or anything like that. So they had like this bizarre world where they had like this very developed airplane infrastructure to fly between cities, like to fly, like say from Columbus to Cleveland, very developed. And the roads were not developed because you couldn't travel because you'd get stopped by guerrillas. So people only went between the cities on airplanes. So then when they got cleaned up, then they started getting rich. They had the roads between a lot of the cities were some hours of the day one direction and some hours of the day the other direction.
Wow.
Because they didn't have enough lanes, so they had a lot of truck traffic because of commerce. So they were like, it was like, oh my God, so you'd have to check. Like, let's say that I was gonna come here from Cincinnati to here, I'd have to check what hours was the road running towards Columbus versus away from Columbus, because they would make it one or the other, because they didn't have more, they were all dilapidated roads. They might be better now.
That's not inconvenient at all, though.
Can you imagine what a cluster F that would be? Or if there's a wreck or something on the road, they were basically dilapidated one-lane roads, because people got into the habit of never traveling between cities.
Were they
In cars.
actually like dirt roads, or were they?
No, they were like, everything I did was in Bogota. So, what I'm telling you about the roads, is what the guys living there were telling me, how,
Right.
and how, because they'd become relatively prosperous. And so, but that created a huge amount of, now you could get between cities, but the biggest thing was there's a lot of commerce of semi-trucks, like you'd have here, because there's no railroad infrastructure pretty much at all in Columbia. So they have to haul things by trucks or by airplane. They always told me to go to Cartagena on a vacation. Like take my wife to Cartagena, because apparently it's like on the coast. And the hotels, there's some hotels where each of the rooms is a different little island.
Oh.
So they like gondola boat you out to your hotel room.
At least you're not gonna get mugged or.
Right.
I'm not sure, I've been to, in my past life, being on agriculture, we traveled a lot to that area. And as a runner, when I first went, I had the military and following me running. The second time I had, the second time I
I hope they were
had,
in shape.
they were, and the mayor, the second time the mayor and his assistant, the third time I ran on that. So it showed you a progression over about a 10-year span of what in Cartagena, in Bogota, I had to go into a field because the roads were so hilly, you couldn't use the surface to walk to run on. It's a beautiful country. Wouldn't want to live there.
My youngest son's friends all went to Honduras for spring break.
Why?
Because one of the,
What?
well,
That's what young kids do.
no, because actually.
Sounds like it didn't involve narcotics trade.
They went, no, it was like, I guess there's like a little enclave where there's, people, have bought in to different whatever in this little area, and I guess it's a beautiful area on the water or whatever. And, so one of his friend's roommates, they own a home down there.
Oh, nice.
And it's like, there's a little village, but they were water taxied out to where the home is at, or like one of those, and, I guess it's like no crime, low crime, whatever. And it's just a beautiful area, like wherever the home is at. And I was like, I said, hi, you're not thinking about going, are you? Because you're not going. And he goes, no, I wasn't invited because he was still recovering from his brain injury and all that stuff, so.
My son had a brain injury?
Oh, yeah.
How?
He was assaulted at school in Oxford, so.
When?
At Miami?
Yeah, December of 2021.
OMG.
That's what I said.
I didn't say color that. I know,
I don't think
so
you did.
is he
no.
doing okay now?
Yeah, he's back in school and,
What damage is it, short-term, long-term, or just?
well,
After his mom got done hitting him all over the place.
exactly. Now he's been released from care. He was released actually last year. So, yeah, I mean, it was.
Thank you.
He had brain bleed, he had a skull fracture, and,
Oh, my Lord.
yeah, so they told us to get there as soon as possible, but maybe this isn't the place, but I don't really care. I do believe it was divine. I think there's definitely divine intervention, because he was in the hospital for 20 days. He was under, he has one of the best neurosurgeons in like the tri-state area, like
Oh, no,
Cincinnati
you're fine.
area, and all through, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio. She's amazing. And she runs pretty much the whole
Where did they
institute.
send him, to UC?
UC Health, yeah.
Oh, that's why he survived.
I know. I mean, that's honestly, and God, God
Right.
definitely had his hand on it, because he never had any invasive procedures done. He never had to have surgery. He never had to have like nothing, they'll put like all that
Stent
crazy.
or anything, Ed, didn't have that at all.
No, and so I definitely believe God said, dude, you're gonna have to, live your life right when this is all said and done, but,
One more question, was it provoked, or was he just in a
Oh,
bad
no.
place?
no, no, it was not provoked.
He was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
No, someone was just a jerk. So, but it's okay. We'll,
My son had a roommate that was Russian some fraternity, and this is not an attack story, but just a stupid kid story. Was Russian some fraternity, in the basement of the fraternity, threw like a wine bottle or something, and the glass shattered and lost his eye.
oh my gosh, ugh, that's terrible.
And I tell my son every day, I don't have a chance now, but I used to tell him, just don't do something that you're gonna look back on and say, I was an idiot.
Yes.
You're gonna have bad stuff happen to you even when you're not an idiot.
Right.
Don't do stuff that you're gonna spend the rest of your life looking back on it and saying, I should have known better than to throw a dang wine bottle.
Oh gosh, that's terrible. I mean, and that's, yeah, so, but he took a while for him to recover, but it's all good. He's back in school. He's been back in school this is a year, so.
What major is he?
Finance, and then like with Miami decided real estate development, which I guess, so he's dabbling in that, but I mean, finance is his main gig, so he's in farmer, so.
Where's he living?
He-
Some rock kid.
Yeah, he's on campus, he's a junior. So he's in a nice little, next year he's gonna live above a Chinese restaurant.
I'll smoke good.
So whatever. It's a beautiful apartment, but I mean, like, oh, did you wonder why it hadn't been taken yet?
I think of that, I don't know if they're in Columbus, but like Penn Station, are there Penn Stations in Columbus?
Yeah.
You go in, it's like, I'm not a fan of it, but I'm not a fan in particular because you go in and it's like you walk out and feel like you need to take a shower just
Yes.
because there's such a layer of grease in the air in the place.
That's why I'm like, do I need to buy a fire ladder? That's what I'm more concerned about. I'm like, should we? Ugh.
I got my son, one. He's like third floor. He's got one.
Yeah.
2 years ago.
That might be his birthday present, because they all forgot to sign the lease to stay where they're at,
How do
and
you get
really
out?
beautiful.
Oh. Oh,
Beautiful.
that's like, these down from the-
Yeah, and so I'm like, here, happy birthday, here's a fire ladder. So, kind of mean on
Something to crawl
my,
down.
do what?
Something to crawl down.
Yeah.
My son was there, he lived in some of the crappiest fraternity houses I have ever seen in my entire life.
In Oxford also? What fraternity, or is that confidential, you know what?
No,
Remember the face.
Yeah, no, it was a two Greek letter fraternity that primarily was in the south. Miami was the farthest north.
Sigma Nu.
Not Sigma Nu.
I wasn't in a fraternity, so I don't know.
I wasn't in a fraternity, but he was.
Me neither.
As a president.
I can't remember,
It's all good, man.
but
That was in the file.
they
How many
did
were
not
in a
have the
fraternity and how many of us were not?
Not.
Ah, the rest of us were not, we had to work our way through.
Who was? Who was here? You were? Do you look back on it as a great time in your life or loved it? So where was the school?
Right
Yeah.
across from the entrance to,
Where'd you go to school?
No, I mean, it used to be
Where'd you go?
36th and Prospect.
Opinion.
we were 33rd across.
My son, my youngest son.
We were over on
He would have
29th.
liked to have been, but that rush was right after he got hurt. So,
During rush hour.
yeah, he was not in school and then he thought he would go back and then
My
kept him
roommate.
out, kept him at home
Our county.
fall of last year, so he went back spring of 23.
When he got ready to
So-
go about.
So are you from the Cincinnati area? No, you just lucky found to.
Well, my older son went to Miami too. So my husband was on the board of regents when that was a thing through the state of Ohio. And so he, you know, went to all of the public schools. And he told my boys, he's like, because they both went to the Auburn. And we were like, well, we'll pay in-state, but not out-of-state. So
Yeah.
so they found Miami and thought it seemed like a really nice, you know, campus. So, okay, it's 1:13, let's come back into session. And Mr. Hicks, you're gonna have, Ms. Martin.
Yes.
And at least for the record, I object to be calling her. I know she was instructed when she finished her last testimony, she was honored and released.
That would
But
be-
since she's here,
That is my fault. I thought that she was released, so, and I excused her, and I apologize for the confusion on that. I'm so sorry. For everybody involved.
well, at least it's my view that the chair releases witnesses, not Mr. Hicks. And at least the chair did do it. And so for the record, I'm objecting, understanding she's here and she's likely going to go forward and testify.
Thank you for that.
Yep, that's fine. Witness can be sworn, we'll go forward.
Please raise your right hand. Be sworn from the tell the truth.
So, Mr. Smartin, in that book that's right over your shoulder there, this, we're eventually going to look at that very quickly, and I hope to be very quick. When you work on mailers or creative work for mailers for candidates, did you get approval from who on mailer for a given candidate's mailers? How did you get? What was your approval process? Okay, were there cases where you did mailers without any candidate approval?
Not that I recall.
Okay. And how would you typically get their approval?
Some sort of communication, email, phone, text,
Okay, so some,
case by case basis, everyone's different.
okay. In that book, could you please flip to, there's a little piece of tape sticking out that says 1026 on it. And that whole little section there is an exhibit entitled S. It's towards the back, but like maybe 3/4 of the way in the back. Do you find that?
Yes.
Okay. So that's, well, just as a aside, would you recognize these generally as mailers that you were involved with?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your role typically with mailers?
I don't have answered this before, but I, would help write, work with the designer and coordinate between candidate and design work.
Okay. That first one in the lower right-hand corner of it, I don't know if you can read it. It's a lot of how good your eyes are. Do you see the little number down there?
Yeah.
And can you read it? Can you actually read it?
20OHSCH001P.
Okay, and do you recognize that nomenclature?
Yes.
Okay, and was that the common
Yes.
nomenclature for all mailers? Okay. So are there any of these mailers that 1 through 7 that you are not familiar with? That you know, I mean, it's not something I was involved in.
What number, what are you referring to, the pages that I'm?
Yeah, well, I apologize, on the things, I put the numbers that are on the bottoms of the mailers, I put up on the right side, so, 001P. And there's 2 pages of that, and then 002P, and then 003P. So, there's page numbers also, but they're kind of blocked by the hole punches. So there's a total of, I think, 7 there. 1P through 7P.
Yep, they look familiar.
Okay.
It's been a while.
Okay. And who did you work with on these? Did you work with the Mighty Group on the actual then production?
On the design work, yes, I did.
Okay. And then that next, now you can read the page number on it. There's one that says page 15 down at the bottom. Were you familiar with that? It's a letter, it's a brief letter.
This is not. I mean, I have worked on letters, I don't recall the specific one.
Okay. You don't recall the specific one, but with candidates, you did work on some letters, maybe not.
Very, like, case by case basis, so I don't recall this one, but I worked on letters.
Okay.
Standard.
And then, if you flip back behind that where it says SCH letter on there, which I put that on there, that was not on the original, I just put the label. I have, by the way, I have the originals over here. Well, I have the originals. It's like putting an exhibit tag on something. It's not intended to be misleading, but why don't I give you the original so that you won't have felt you were misled in any way? These are originals. There's the original.
Okay.
To your knowledge, were those approved and sent out?
I cannot speak to this since I don't recall the letter, but I'm sorry. I don't recall, like, I cannot speak to each specific approval and send. I would have to look at, I probably could in March of 2020, but cannot today.
Would you, but what I handed you are originals in your?
Okay. So I'm sure
Would
the
you
person
agree
that
that those are
received it
original?
could speak to, but I did not receive all of these myself, so I cannot say that they were mailed, other than seeing that someone else obviously handed them to you. Although there's no, I assume you blocked out, did you block out the address? There's no address.
I don't know if you can ask me questions, but I'm glad to answer, but.
I'm just,
so
you could say, like.
Yeah,
I could
those
say, of
were
course,
actually
they're
provided
mailed.
to me by various voters in the community.
Object and move to strike.
I'm just responding to her question.
You're not entitled to respond to her question.
Go on.
Okay, and,
Move to strike his comment.
Okay, that's fine. That makes sense. Go ahead.
and my wife erased the signatures because the people were afraid of either being identified who provided those.
And again, move to strike
Concerning?
concerning your statement. It wasn't even a question.
Oh, okay.
I'm just responding to her, so.
Well, and
So
I
the-
think that the respondent would again reiterate this statement in the record that people who receive this were afraid of retaliation is prejudicial, harmful, and should be stricken from this record. It was not a question, it was a statement.
I'm going to overrule it only because we hear that, this commission hears comments like that on a lot of cases, whether it's a disclaimer case or anything else. I appreciate your concerns, don't get me wrong, but that's not an out of the ordinary statement for anybody that wants to potentially file a complaint or come before the commission.
So on page, there's page numbers at the bottom of that, and this is actually duplicative of a different exhibit. We can look at the actual original version of this is Exhibit A, but it's the invoice that's $39,122. So, looking at those items, I particularly would look at, SCH 007, for example, they're directly to that, and a cost of $5,800. In your experience, is that typical of the kind of cost range of a mailer in a representative race, or at least a mailer in that time frame of the 2020 election?
I mean, prices are a function of the quantity of, the universe mailed and the size of the actual mailer itself. So whether it's an 8.5 by 11 or 5 by 9, or if it folds. So, I mean, could this potentially be the cost of a mailer? Yes. Could I denote exactly what type of mailer? I cannot.
Okay, well, but like, for example, that first one, 001P and 002P is 10,000. Would you agree that that's what it says? For two mailers?
I would agree that it says $10,130.
Okay, and you would agree that the mailers that I did, the original mailers that I handed you are labeled as those exact numbers?
Yes.
001P and 002P.
Yes.
Okay, and then if you flip one more page back to what's labeled as page 17, this is actually, I think this one is actually Exhibit C or something like that. This is a duplicate of it. Do you see 001P on there, or 001? 001P or 002P?
Are you referring to the invoice number 1127?
Yeah, the one that says the
I cannot
balance due
see
is
either
20,260.
001P or 002P.
Okay. But you would agree that in the stack that I handed you, the originals and in Exhibit X, there is a 001P and a 002P, for example.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. No, because not all of these would be included. So I just noticed that these are different disclaimers. So
I might have included two by accident.
So-
Hold on,
yeah,
those two.
well, I'm just trying to make sure I'm
Yeah, I understand.
understanding. So these are not, that's not, I wouldn't have nothing to do with those.
Okay. So the ones you have should be the ones, I'm sorry, I accidentally did you out of that envelope. Yeah.
Yeah, here's one. Here's your 001P.
Okay, it's the one with the coronavirus resource guide on it.
Sure.
By the way, did you do those coronavirus type resource guides for multiple candidates? Was that a common format used for candidates?
In March of 2020, during the coronavirus epidemic, yes, in fact it was.
Okay.
Very pertinent to world events.
Okay. All right, I don't think I have any other questions.
Mr. O'Brien?
Ms. Fitzmartin, those 7 exhibits and Exhibit S, or there's 7 mailers in Exhibit S that Mr. Hicks had you go through. Can you state to the commission that those were mailed for purposes of the primary in 2020?
Yes, yes, sir.
And can you state whether they were mailed or not?
I can say they were designed, I at this time do not recall if every single designed mailer was mailed.
And so are you in a position here today to say those mailers were mailed to residents in the district that Gene Schmidt was running, yes or no?
I'm certain that some of them were, I cannot speak to every single one.
There are 7 of them that are marked with those numbers Mr. Hicks went through. So is it your testimony, you believe some were mailed, but you can't testify that all were mailed?
I mean, I'm seeing mailers right here, so yes, but I don't know exactly like every single one was mailed. Because there are different ways of,
Well, sometimes there are things printed but not mailed.
yes.
And there's sometimes the polling that may be done in the district at the time, you decide not to spend the money on mailing something that has been printed.
Yes,
And you don't know whether that happened in this case or not, correct?
I do not recall today.
And at least I have no other questions.
May I see the letter?
So just a quick redirect. The letter's in that binder, so so just to be clear for the record, Mrs. Martin, did you give me any of these mailers?
I'm sorry?
Did you give me copies of any of these mailers?
Well, I actually don't, which side of Claremont County? Because you might have received mail that.
No, I'm saying, did you give me any
Did I
physical,
personally
you know,
hand you?
here's?
No, the first time I handed you anything was right.
Okay, so you would testify that I didn't receive these mailers from you? I didn't receive these physical, I'm talking about these physical finished mailers. I did not receive them from you.
I don't understand, sorry, I don't understand your question.
Okay. Did I receive these physical mailers from you?
I just handed you them,
So the answer is no, I did not.
correct?
That's all.
Commissioners have questions of,
Oh, sorry, I haven't asked it.
I have a couple, Mr. Martin, just real easy. So during this particular campaign season, how many different campaigns did you work on?
I think I had, like, somewhere, I think Omar said like between 10 to 13, I call it, but
No,
somewhere
no,
in that
that's okay, I
ballpark.
just need to, okay.
Contested primaries, and then I also, helped all the elected members, everyone's all the sitting House of Representatives, so at that point in time, we had 64 seats. And just because someone wasn't in a contested primary doesn't mean that they didn't need help with various things, especially during the pandemic, everyone had a lot of time sitting at home. So there's a lot of, a lot of extra time.
And then could you guesstimate during that period how many mailers you did for everybody?
In total,
I mean, was it 100, was it 200? Was it-
probably ballpark, like 100-ish.
Well, fine,
And
thank you.
any other questions? May I excuse?
Well, I have a redirect just for clarification. When you said you worked with 10 to 13 in response to Commissioner's question, were there, help to clarify, does that mean that there were 10 to 13 for which you were involved with mailers? Or there were 10, what does 10 to 13 mean?
I said contested primaries, it's when there's a primary that there are more than one candidate in that, said primary race.
So how many races would you ballpark you were involved with creating mailers for? I don't care whether they're contested or in the primary.
Primary? I mean, at least 13, and then some individuals still like to send out mail even if they are not in a contested race for whatever reason to communicate with their constituents. So I mean, say for a handful, just for them, a handful of some of those folks that like to send out mail.
So something in the order of 13,
15 to 20?
15 to 20 for which you did mailers.
Yes.
Okay.
Because again, some like to do it even if they are not in a contested primary race.
Okay, and how many other media, like radio, TV?
I don't know. I mean, I don't recall.
A smaller number, greater number, same number? Just a ballpark. I realize you wouldn't remember.
Phones, people like phones, because again, there's time. So,
Talking about radio or TV advertising.
I don't recall.
Okay.
Any other questions based on the redirect? Okay. excused,
Yes,
like not to be recalled?
yes.
Okay, thank you. You're
That's all.
excused. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so in light of the new evidence of the actual physical mailers, I'd like to recall Gene Schmidt. And in light of the testimony that mailers were approved by the candidates,
Respondent objects to recalling Ms. Schmidt. She testified, I don't know if it was in May or in July, although we completely recall as a witness by Mr. Hicks. She was concluded. I said that I may or may not call her as part of my case. In fact, I don't think I've cross-examined her because she was his witness and I didn't listen to any information from her after she testified. So at this point, I don't think he can recall her. I don't know how, what his quote new evidence is.
new evidence is the 7 physical specific mailers
Which
in the testimony that mailers were approved by the candidate.
not specifically, not this candidate. And
Well, I'd like to hear her testify to that.
May I finish? I don't know how many times we would allow Mr. Hicks to recall witnesses in this matter. And I object, that's not new evidence. It may be new evidence to Mr. Hicks. As I sit here, he could have printed it himself down in Claremont County between the last hearing and now. We have no idea where that item came from.
We do from the testimony of Megan Fitzmartin.
Ms. Fitzmartin doesn't know where it came from. She said 2 of them she recognized, the others she didn't. And she can't
That's not
testify
her
that they were
testimony.
manual. So I guess I would object to recalling Ms. Schmidt, particularly if it's for the purposes of having her testify about these mailers. She's not entitled to do that.
I'm going to sustain that objection. And, you know, there were general conversation about, you know, the billing and all that as it relates to the materials in question. Just having them here doesn't necessarily change the fact that they were identified as a part of the billing process, et cetera. So you had an opportunity to question her on those previously.
The actual physical mailers is new evidence. You have a right to recall people to comment on testimony and new evidence. So all I'm wanting to do is ask Ms. Schmidt, did you or did you not approve these mailers directly with the testimony of Megan Fitzmartin that she always had candidate approval on any mailers? That's all I want to ask her.
And I would add, if you ask her that, that still does not prove that they were actually mailed. As Ms. Fitzmartin testified to, mailers are often printed and not mailed because.
That's not what she testified to. You're extending what she testified to into a broader statement.
The objection is sustained.
Then I rest my case.
Thank you.
I have prepared at the close of Mr. Hicks's case, a motion for a directed verdict based on the evidence that's been presented to the commission.
This motion hasn't been presented in accordance with your rules. You can't just drop a motion during a hearing that's not been presented that I can't make arguments to on real time.
And you can't make a motion for a directed verdict until the evidence is closed on the other side. So I have a copy that I'm going to present to the chair and other members of the commission, and then we can argue whether or not it's wrong.
Well, wait, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, a motion for directed verdict is based on, you know, once the complainant.
Can I just have a procedural question?
Once the complainant rests his case, then a respondent can make a motion for directed verdict. It just says the evidence is presented, you know, essentially his motion is the evidence that is presented is insufficient to establish his case. And so that's the motion that we have before us. But I've always seen in writing. So the commission has regularly dealt with those, and then, you know, Mr. O'Brien would get an opportunity to address his motion, and Mr. Hicks would get an opportunity to respond.
Just as a procedural thing, did she walk off with those mailers?
No, she
No,
gave
they
it
were
back
on,
to
they
you.
were on, they were right there on your table.
She gave it back to you and then the others that were different disclaimer.
She had them in a book and then,
No.
but,
She just put it, she just casually comes them
She
on.
handed them.
oh, I
to-
have, you're right, I think that- yeah, I'm sorry, my bad.
No, you're good.
And at least at this point, the respondent would make a motion for directed verdict based on the evidence that has been presented to you before, I think, separate hearings, going back to when this complaint was first filed as a preliminary review. Mr. Richter recommended to this commission that charge be dismissed at that time without any evidence before the commission. And the commission members by a split vote decided, well, let's let Mr. Hicks go on a fishing expedition for 2 years now in order to collect information and evidence to show that he may be able to make his case. We have a complaint filed and then an amended complaint. Those exhibits are before you, and they allege, number one, that there were in-kind contributions not reported by the Schmidt Committee. They had in-kind contributions that weren't reported were alleged in a complaint to be R.J. Mancini, Luke Householder, Tommy Rolfe, and Steve Caraway. There's absolutely zero evidence whatsoever that Ms. Schmidt, who has the duty to report those in-kind contributions, was ever put on notice that she needed to report that. We had Mr. Seekauer from the Ohio Republican Party that paid Mr. R.J. Mancini say and testify before the commission that he did report an in-kind contribution by ORP to the House Republican Campaign Committee. The House Republican Campaign Committee had the obligation to notify Ms. Schmidt of that in-kind contribution, and the evidence is they did not. So how is she supposed to, as Mr. Caraway testified this afternoon, report an in-kind contribution by by ORP through Mr. Mancini? She can't do it. The other individuals, Mr. Caraway, Mr. Ball, and Householder, the only thing we heard about is he parked a car or a truck in some hotel, and Mr. Hicks concluded he was working on campaigns. Because they didn't want the adverse publicity due to his last name, he was pulled out of Claremont County right away. And I know that we've had hearings over 4 days, spread over 5 months, but I'm accurately reflecting and remembering that testimony that we heard. And in fact, I think Mr. Hicks objected to the characterization that because he was stalking Mr. Householder, he was pulled out of Claremont County. But in any event, in terms of a claim of a failure to report in-kind contribution, there's been a miserable failure to prove that, in fact, Jean Schmidt failed to report or her committee that R.J. Mancini in-kind contribution. And I think that the evidence is clear that no one told her that she needed to report that. Mr. Caraway explained it here again this afternoon. The candidate can't report what they don't know. And so with respect to Mr. Mancini, that was not failed to report the in-kind contribution violation. The key to these statutes, as the commission is well aware, is knowingly filing a false report. And Ms. Schmidt had no knowledge that Mr. Mancini existed until this complaint was filed by Mr. Hicks. And in fact, Mr. Mancini, when called to testify, said that he at best had been put on a Facebook where he made no posts. He went to a neighborhood meeting where he was asked to take pictures and he couldn't remember if he did. And then number 3,
That's not correct.
It's his argument.
Okay.
and then 3, that Mr. Mancini went door to door twice, was his testimony under oath. I've attached to this motion and I've provided to the commissioners various items that include a statement by Mr. Mancini during his testimony that he went, knocked for then candidate Schmidt once or twice. It's page 12, it is noted, page 129 of the transcript, and this is Mr. Hicks's transcript, and on about the 3rd or 4th line, I knocked for new candidate Schmidt once or twice, as Mr.
That
Caraway.
was his transcript from the prior case, not this case.
I'd ask the chair to direct Mr. Hicks not to interrupt my argument.
It's his argument. Let him make the argument and you'll get your opportunity.
Thank you. That's what Mr. Mancini testified under oath. As Mr. Caraway again said here today, how do you measure what that benefit is to the Schmidt campaign, assuming that he did do it and assuming she knew about it? Knocking on the door twice, if he was paid over a period of 6 weeks by ORP, how do you allocate that to a report that is filed with the Secretary of State by a state rep candidate is under election falsification, a felony, election falsification constraints. So you can't file a report that's false. You can't file a report that you don't know the exact amount that you need to list on the report. And so Peter Schmidt, who's Gene's treasurer, could not file an appropriate report because he first had no knowledge of it. And even if he did, how would he come up with a number? Through that process, the in-kind allegation by Mr. Hicks has no merit. The other claim of an in-kind contribution by Longstreth Constant Content, or JPL, is that this staff, Caraway, Rolfe, Fitzmartin, and Mancini, was provided at no cost. I think it's clear, and you don't have to be anyone other than someone who can add and subtract to look at exhibit number 11, the $164,000 invoice that Gene Schmidt paid $100,000 upon receipt and paid $64,000 on April 2nd with a report. So she acknowledged the invoice, she paid a large part of it, and then she paid the balance before the next report was due. She acknowledged that entire amount, and that amount, when you look at the invoices to Constant Content from Strategic Media, which are exhibits 11, the series in exhibit 11, you don't have to be a mathematician to look at it, although Mr. Hicks would demand that, to see that the $1,500 that Strategic Media charged Constant Content for the photo shoot, that Constant Content turned around and billed $1,650, precisely 10%. You don't have to be a mathematician to look at the radio production in airtime to see that there is a 10% upcharge. And you don't have to be a mathematician to look at the billing on the cable airtime and the TV airtime. There's a 10% markup. And as Mr. Caraway again testified today, you can't keep with 13 candidates or 8 candidates or how many you're working on, a diary that identifies a percentage of your day for each candidate to report to them an in-kind contribution. Gene Schmidt had a campaign consultant, JPL, on Constant Content. And they were to do everything that was needed to win that election, whether it was polling, whether it was staff in the field assisting, whether it was creative, whether it was airtime, radio, cable, or regular TV. And they did it. And they charged her a 10% surcharge, which was their overhead and profit. And they don't have to separately report the amount of that as an in-kind contribution. So the staff is not an in-kind contribution. So any claim as to an in-kind contribution has no merit. And Mr. Caraway himself says he does it in his campaign consulting business. The final issue that remains for the commission, and I think is the Goldstein collection of the outstanding debt. We have a $39,000 invoice that allegedly came from February and March of 2020 that is dated, and I think these dates are important, November of 2020, but is sent to and received not by Jeff Longstreth or JPL, but by collection lawyer Mr. Goldstein in August of 21. So a year and a half later, the invoice appears out of the air, and you say, gee, this is a convicted felon who pled guilty in federal court who is sending me an invoice for services that a year and a half later did he really provide them, or was he trying to raise money to pay his defense lawyer? That's a legitimate question, not only Ms. Schmidt, but 10 or 12 other House candidates had. And we heard Mr. Goldstein say and testify that Ms. Schmidt and only one other of those candidates ever contacted him or ever made a payment on the alleged invoice. And Mr. Hicks asked him, well, why do you think she paid this invoice? And his answer was very telling, because she's honest. She looked at it, she asked them to produce the evidence that there were services. Mr. Caraway said that all the other candidates who received a similar letter were told, hey, if you owe it, pay it, ask him to produce it. Mr. Goldstein, his lawyer, couldn't provide anything other than what was paid. And it was a negotiated settlement. It's not a corporate contribution. The services, based on the evidence, 2 years later and after multiple hearings, and Mr. Hicks scavenged in the neighborhood and producing some mailers without a chain of evidence for them, is still has failed to prove that there was anything other than the $20,000 that Mr. Goldstein and Peter Schmidt negotiated as a resolution. So based on the evidence before the commission, there's not a preponderance of the evidence to go forward, and I'd ask for a directed verdict based on complete failure of proof 2.5 years later, confirming Mr. Richter's belief at the outset that there was not a violation. So thank the commissioners for consideration. Mr. Richter.
Well, since this was something I had for my closing, since he has new paperwork, I'll have it through. So this is some notes and a timeline. See what I'll do, I'll start one on this side and start here.
Somebody, one of each.
Yeah. I'm gonna wait till everybody has one anyway. Sorry. That's enough. Sorry. Oh, no, it's gonna be that. Word reporter. There's a lot of fanciful stuff just said, and a lot of misrepresentation of testimony, including I think that he said that I said that Ms. Schmidt was honest.
No, I said that Mr. Goldstein, in response to one of your questions, well, why did she pay it?
I don't remember that,
Said
but okay.
she was honest.
Okay, so here's what I want to hit on here on this motion, which I haven't even had, which is how many pages? I haven't even had a chance to digest it at all. So this is not a real hard case. It's hard because it's getting stretched out, not because of me. So this matter should have been settled. There's this timeline document. I handed you a copy. In the time, I have another. I think I have an extra one. So Ms. Schmidt wants one. Ron. So in this timeline, I highlighted some yellow things. So when reports were filed, what happened, and I think it's just to be put into context. This should have been resolved almost immediately. Even if you accept this notion that Ms. Schmidt had no knowledge of things going on where the testimony of Mr. Fitzmartin is, for example, that the candidate approved the mailers, then even if that were the case, this should have been cleared up immediately upon pretty much within a week or two of the filing of my complaint. So if you look, I filed my complaint on 6/8/2021. Schmidt received a notice of complaint on 6/16/21 from the commission. The second constant content invoice from Goldstein was on 8/6/21. I amended the complaint a little bit on 8/9 in the hearing, the preliminary review, at which at which probable cause was found for a full hearing took place. So I just want you to think of that timeline. What should have happened? What do we need to have happen in Ohio campaign finance? Well, when something like this comes up, the candidate just fixes it. Just says, you know what? It's not hard to figure out. You know, Mr. Mancini, despite its characterization, Mr. Mancini's testimony was first that he spent 1 day a week. Then when I questioned him on that, it became 10%. Then I did the math. Well, that's $700 based on what you were compensated. It wasn't hard to figure out what kind of number should be reported as an in-kind. Similarly, on the Goldstein invoice, constant content to corporation. I provided evidence, you can dispute it, and maybe I made it in my basement, maybe I manufactured something out of thin air, but she didn't recognize that it was fraudulent. I produced the mailers associated with that, and all of the items are accounted for that were on the Goldstein invoice. She only paid for 4 out of the 8 items. A corporation can't write off. You know, there's an exhibit in here, you can go look at it, the Secretary of State exhibit. The corporation can't write off a debt. That's considered an in-kind contribution from a corporation, which is illegal. An individual or an LLC could, but then that's an in-kind contribution from an individual or LLC that is legal. The reason why a corporation can't do it is because it is illegal for a corporation to make any kind of contribution. That's why the Secretary of State specifically calls out corporations cannot forgive. They can't write off. So what do I think, you know, in this handout that I provided, I hit the timeline a little bit, but in this handout I provided, I put the letter from your exhibits, Ron, of what was received. What were my allegations? Failure to file a complete and accurate statement. And there's multiple citations there because whoever made the laws in Ohio decided to have the statutes actually have different portions based on whether it was pre-primary, post-primary, pre-election, post-election. So that's why you get a bunch of this, because it's hard to ascertain when should something have been reported. Okay. And then corporate contributions. So if I look at this at just that statement, failure to file an accurate complete report. Okay. What have I shown? Well, by the way, I put below there where it says probable cause was found. I put the statutory references to each of those code sections on this document. So you can read what do the statutes actually say. And the underlining there is mine, okay, that I added to this. So if I look at what I have proven, not what I'm speculating, is that yes, RJ Mancini was compensated and did work for Ms. Schmidt. We can argue about whether it was 1 day a week or 10% or whatever, but he did work and he was compensated, and that's supposed to be reported. And there's nothing in the law in Ohio that says, well, if it's under 700 or based on the Mr. Caraway statement, you know, if it had an impact, you need to report it, but if it didn't have an impact, you don't need to report it. None of that's based in law. So I think I've proven that by the testimony of RJ Mancini, that he did. And I don't care whether it's, you know, I think Mr. Mancini's under a lot of pressure because he has a job in the House where Ms. Schmidt is a representative, you know, to probably minimize the amount of effort he spent, but he can't do it so much that he can't admit, yeah, I did some door knocking. By the way, remember, when he did door knocking, who gave him the direction to do the door knocking? Tommy Rolfe. Tommy Rolfe gave him the direction and the list to go and door knock for. So I think I've proven already that was an in-kind contribution from the ORP. And even if you go with some notion of, oh, it's maybe she didn't know, she had no clue that RJ Mancini was doing anything. She knew from my complaint. She had the documentation from my complaint, but instead of just fixing her campaign finance, could you imagine? He likes to bring up that it was a tie vote at first on whether to dismiss or not, you know, whatever the voting was. It was like a close vote, and then there was another vote, blah, 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 okay? So can you imagine what would have happened in that vote? Had Ms. Schmidt's reaction to my complaint been to fix her reporting and then come in and say, yep, we made a mistake, I fixed the reporting, we're good to go. You guys would have found either no violation or or good cause or what have you, and it would have been over. And this is what I think scares me, and it should scare you, and it should scare everybody in Ohio, is that we've had this campaign political culture where it's like a game of who can come up with the most ridiculous plausible denial. Maybe I made mailers in my basement. As excuses to get out of any accountability. We need to have a system in Ohio where candidates believe in campaign finance being accurate, that's a value. By the way, you had your earlier discussion about big fines, little fines. You know, the fine schedule's in your own document. So if you don't like the fine schedule, change the document. But my point is, with that is, they either need to have that as a value, or they need to be afraid of getting caught. Look at everything that happened with Larry Householder. This is the Larry Householder candidate. This is all the Larry Householder mechanism. I think I've proven clearly that there were in-kind contributions not reported. And as much as they want to have, well, some plausible denial, by the way, you notice that this 10% argument, why didn't they offer that argument back in 2021? Why did that argument only get developed during the pendency of this case? And I'll remind you of Ms. Schmidt's testimony that when she received the Goldstein invoice, which was after, I just want to make sure I said this right, was after I had filed my complaint. She thought they were so disconnected. This is her own testimony. My complaint and that invoice were so disconnected relating to Stephen Caraway that she didn't even ask. That was her testimony. It's kind of like when I describe, I have some lawyer friends that tell me things like, well, how does the slogan go? Some of you might have heard it, shield and a sword. On the one hand, they were disconnected. On the other hand, that's the explanation. This can't be the way campaign finance works in Ohio. There has to be some accountability. Now, just for sake of this 2-page handout that I provided, on page 2, what is the standard of proof for one of these hearings? What is the standard of proof? So probable cause is the standard to have a hearing, right? That there was probable cause. And I addressed that earlier. The standard for the hearing is, the standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence. Okay, which is a lower standard than clear and convincing, or a lower standard than a criminal, a criminal conviction would be. It's preponderance of the evidence. What does preponderance of the evidence mean? Something is more likely to have occurred than it did not. I think one of the things that this commission needs to do, and I apologize, I know I'm a pain in the neck, okay, needs to start having a reputation with the political system that these rope-a-dope things aren't going to be tolerated. That people come in, and I think, I'm not the one making a farce of the OEC. What's made a farce is when candidates come in and they just believe they can get away with stuff, a plausible denial. Oh, I didn't know this. When they were activities that they personally participated in. And then they said, well, I couldn't figure it out. Oh, I never could. Did you go ask RJ Mancini? No. What did you do? I got a lawyer. That was the testimony. Well, why wouldn't you go ask? One key aspect of campaign finance, he mentioned knowingly, and I think these things were knowingly, but there's another key aspect, which is good faith. If people start acting without good faith, which I think they do a lot of the times in Ohio, where do we get? What's the whole point of campaign finance? What's the whole point of this body? What's the point of any of these laws if we have a political system that tolerates on this? For example, this case, by the way, this is a Larry Householder deal. This isn't just Joe Blow, county commissioner, that kind of thing. This is where lots and lots of money was being thrown around in there. So when it comes to the bottom of that, however the reports, he made a statement that I guess what he's saying is this should be dismissed now because I haven't proven anything. We just spent 4 days, hanging out, listening to jibber jabber. I think I've proved a lot. I think I've established by the testimony of the witnesses that RJ Mancini did provide compensated services for Gene Schmidt, and they were never reported anywhere. I think I showed, by a preponderance of the evidence at least, that these field services things were not rebuilt anywhere. It's very convenient. Nobody has any actual contracts, evidence, or documents that talk about any of the things that are being said as to how this was probably done. I think by a preponderance, is it more likely or not that these things were not being rebuilt to candidates or shown as in kind? And then the killer on my last one, which was corporate contributions, I basically got them to admit they accepted an improper corporate contribution. How? When they negotiated that invoice into their own testimony, when they forgave part of it, when Constant Content forgave part of it, it's a corporation. I've shown copies of the individual mailers that went out. Other than me making them up, fabricating them in my basement, you know, how would I have otherwise done this? And the point being that there were, all 8 things are accounted for. That Goldstein invoice, all 8 things were accounted for. The invoice, a lot of times they want to not look at actual records, like there's no agreements, there's no contracts, there's no nothing. You're just supposed to believe stuff. The actual record shows that they only paid for 4 of them, $20,000 something. So I think I've proven that they accepted a corporate contribution when they, after consulting with the Secretary of State, apparently got a corporation to forgive $20,000 in debt. Can't do that in Ohio. And the next thing you know, if there's never any accountability for this stuff, hey, why doesn't Procter & Gamble just spend $2 million electing a candidate they like and then just never tell them? It's all okay then. So I think these cases, and I apologize, and I'm very passionate about this, and I think campaign finance, clean campaign finance is something we need to all strive for in Ohio, is that there needs to be a point where candidates don't go through these rope-a-dopes that take my time, take your time, take everybody's time. But as it goes to the actual case, I don't see how you dismiss a case where I've absolutely proven that R.J. Mancini did compensated work for Gene Schmidt. I don't see how you dismiss a case where by their own testimony, they had $20,000 worth of debt forgiven by a corporation in violation of Ohio law. Okay? I don't know how you go on this presumption that this invented 10% scenario that never came up in 2 years. He likes to say it's been going on for years. It's only been in the last, 2 meetings that this 10%, it was the last meeting where this 10% thing came up, the Ron O'Brien 10%. Okay, that just came up in the last meeting. That was the first time that was presented. Why wouldn't that have been presented 2 years ago? So that's my response. Again, I don't think this is due process. I don't have the ability to absorb this. You know, there's this, it gets thrown on my desk, a big thick thing. I don't know how regular court works. No, but I think that probably, if I was a lawyer, counsel for the other side would have a chance to absorb what was actually in the document. Okay, so, but suffice it to say, I think that this motion to dismiss directed verdict would be to accept it would be an affront when I have shown very clearly by a preponderance of the evidence, more likely to happen than not, that R.J. Mancini did compensated work for Gene Schmidt that was never reported, that they accepted an almost $20,000 corporate contribution when Constant Content forgave a bunch of mailers that did take place, and that you have to believe in fantasy to think that the Steve Caraway story that never existed until the last meeting is a valid story as to how they got rebuilt, which, by the way, they can provide no evidence for other than Mr. O'Brien making exhibits. So thank you for the chance to comment.
Thank you. What is sorry about this?
By the way, could somebody explain what's the process on one of these motions, since I don't know, like, he's just getting up and starting to talk now?
Yeah, it's called rebuttal on Mr.
Why didn't I ask you guys, somebody explain the process?
To conclude, you concluded your case.
Yeah.
At that point, then the respondent has an ability to move for a directed verdict, essentially asking the commission.
No, I was meaning more specific, tell him just standing up and starting to talk.
I will just go through the whole process.
Okay, thank you.
He moves for a directed verdict. If the commission at the end, if the commission decides to accept the motion and act on it, then it essentially finds that there's no violation of the case is over. But anyway, he gets up and makes his presentation.
Okay.
you get up and make your presentation, as you did, and he's given a brief opportunity to respond briefly, then the commission will decide whether it wants to accept his motion to approve the directed verdict or not. If they do, then the matter's done. If they don't, then it goes forward, and he has an ability to then provide whatever evidence as a part of this case that he wishes to provide. That's the process.
Okay,
And I appreciate, normally, I don't know that, I mean, we have in the past, when cases have, it's been a while, when the cases have reached this point, we've had directed verdicts before. I don't know that we've ever gotten an actual written directed verdict motion. Generally, it's the respondent's counsel stands up, I'm moving for a directed verdict, here's my arguments, the other side argues.
Okay.
And so that's where we are. He gets an opportunity to briefly rebut, and then that's the close of argument, and then it goes to the commission motion.
Thank you.
And at least in terms of response to what Mr. Hicks says, there's not one bit of evidence that debt was forgiven. Mr. Hicks specifically asked Mr. Goldstein if Constant Content, quote, wrote off that balance of the debt. And Mr. Goldstein said, I don't know what they did. I'm their lawyer for collection purposes. I'm not their internal corporate lawyer. And I have no idea. There's no evidence. In fact, the evidence is via the exchange of the emails, the letter from Mr. Goldstein to begin with, is that there was a negotiated settlement based on what Mr. Goldstein and the vendor, Mr. Longstrike, could show they provided. And it was the $20,260 that they could prove, as Mr. Caraway said, their people were told, if they can prove the services were provided, pay for them. And Gene Schmidt, and there's an email from Peter Schmidt to Brian Katz at the Secretary of State's office, says, look, we just want to do what is required by law and what's fair, right, and just. And Mr. Goldstein himself said she paid what we could show her she owed. And it hasn't changed since then. Mr. Hicks has produced some flyers that are related to the Schmidt campaign, but there's no evidence that 1, 2, 50, or 5,000 of those were printed, or 1, 2, 50, or 5,000 were ever mailed. And he, since it's his witness, he can bring in whoever it is in Claremont County that says they received those mailers in their mailbox. He could have brought them up here, and they could have taken the stand, and they could have taken that chair, and they could have, like Ms. Fitzmartin, answered questions. But he chose, intentionally, I might add, not to present that evidence to this commission. And the commission's entitled, as Mr. Richter will tell you, to take an adverse inference from the fact of him failing to produce that information. All we have is some flyers that he says he got from somebody who doesn't want to be identified, and Ms. Fitzmartin saying, yeah, I can't tell you if these were sent out or how many were sent out. And so there was a negotiated settlement that happens every day, and that negotiated settlement was not a forgiveness. John Glenn went to his grave owing tens of thousands of dollars on his presidential campaign. That doesn't mean that he took an unlawful corporate contribution. This commission would think that we do indeed owe that other $19,000. I think that Ms. Schmidt would the very next day file an amended report and say, we have an outstanding debt of $19,000. But the thing is, he has not proven. He has chosen to file a complaint and an amended complaint alleging criminal conduct, I might add, that this commission hears first and can have the option, as you know, of 1 or 3 alternatives, one of which is to send it to the prosecutor. So the question is he presented information sufficient that will cause you, as one of the options, to feel he has proven by a preponderance a corporate contribution, an in-kind contribution, or forgiveness of a debt. And that clearly is not in the evidence. It's his case, his complaint, his charge, and he has failed to prove it. And for all those reasons, RJ Mancini, if he indeed did work on the campaign, and if indeed his time's $700, once again, that's something that Ms. Schmidt, I'm quite sure, would be willing to amend the report and to pay whoever is due to be paid. ORP, HRCC was in kind. We saw the email about who does ORP need to be in-kind on. Ms. Schmidt wasn't on the list. Ms. Schmidt has been very diligent trying to file the reports that she needed to file. And the allegations are that she and her campaign knowingly failed to include the information in reports that were filed. And clearly, if Mr. Hicks wants to say today that knowingly she is aware of certain things, that's fine. But back when the report was filed, she didn't knowingly omit Mr. Mancini. She didn't knowingly fail to include an invoice that she didn't receive until August of 21. So based on the information, the respondent would ask for the director's verdict. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Commission member, so, Commissioner Weather. And again, this is determining whether the commission wishes to accept the director's verdict, essentially declare the matter resolved, or overrule that motion, and then Mr. O'Brien would get an opportunity to present any evidence that he's issued.
Madam Chair, I don't believe we ever got a chance to see this. Is it possible to see this?
Well, I object to the admission of
Wait,
those
stop, what?
documents. Yeah.
Excuse us. Hold on one minute.
Wait,
Are they? Okay, we'll have to address that.
Yeah, I was gonna file. This is
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for running up here.
Yes, I was like,
Appreciate it.
sorry.
All of it.
I think respectfully,
Hold on,
Thank
your
you.
time to talk.
This is our time for discussion.
well, I was just going to note, those documents are not in evidence. He did
Okay.
not offer them, they were not admitted, and the fact finder should not see or hear them, so for what
Okay,
that's worth.
thank you. Okay, I didn't know what we were talking about. Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
No.
Commissioner Hagan, since those were never admitted into evidence as exhibits,
How are they not admitted into evidence as exhibits when they were then not,
we should have all received, she should have had
you
to.
got them, I sent them to you.
Oh, yes, you're right.
You have
No,
minutes of
them.
no, you know what you have in your hand.
These are only to authenticate what I provided you in copy.
And what you provided to them in copies does not admit them into evidence. They have to be admitted into evidence. You
That's at
cannot-
the end,
Oh,
when we go through
Yes.
admissions
okay,
of evidence.
time out. Time out. What you have in here, okay, so those are whited out, right? These are blacked out on here. So what you did was you made a copy of that, scanned it in presumably,
Mhm.
and then blacked out the address.
Mhm.
So that is exactly what we have on, that was given to us, what?
Yesterday, I think I
Yesterday.
circulated along to everybody.
We do have that. But instead of, I see why you want to see that. But he's saying, Mr. Hicks is saying is that what we have in this email marked Exhibit S, where it's blacked out, on there it's whited out, correct? So
These are
we,
the originals of that.
those are the originals. So can we look at those since we have copies?
I appreciate Mr. O'Brien.
Madam Chairman, that is not evidence even on your computer, and you cannot consider, I raised this at
That's not your evidence.
at every other trial, administrative hearing, in this state, in this building, evidence is marked, you move to admit, it's admitted into evidence, it's therefore in the record. If there's an appeal to common pleas court, Mr. Victor sends that to the court. Merely emailing to you a document does not render it admitted in evidence. and he rested his case.
But we really haven't, and I appreciate what you're saying, we
Well,
probably should
that's
have
the
asked
law.
him to admit his case as evidence, but technically under that argument that we haven't admitted any of the evidence, and I don't think that does a service to the commission
There was
at this point.
Well, there was a document that was submitted to me and marked in red what was admitted and things that
And
were
that's what I was gonna propose.
not
At the end,
admitted
and
were
not
Xed out. And,
Right, but I don't think we ever acted on that.
well, I don't think he did either, but he rested his case.
But
And
we
I-
already have it as an exhibit, right?
But we already have it here, and you'd be welcome to make your argument if we don't, if this thing moves forward in some manner or form. But I think we should take them, to me, in an effort to try and be equitable here, we should take them in, accept them as exhibits, since we essentially have had them available to us. I appreciate the difference, but I'm gonna say we go ahead and accept them as exhibits. Let them look at it, and if it comes down to it later on, you can certainly make that argument.
I guess respectfully, I don't think it's an argument, it's the law. He did not admit it, move to admit them into evidence. They're not in evidence. There's no chain in custody for these documents. They appeared here in court by Mr.
Well, then that's all of it. Everything.
And you need chain in custody for evidence of any kind, sort, or nature. So I guess I will, note my objection for the record and
Thank you, your objection is noted. But I think for the efficiency of the commission to move forward, I think it's appropriate to let them be reviewed and go forward. And, your objection is noted. We better object, over the years, we've entered an objection, or entered exhibits over objections as well, so.
Madam Chair, may I provide context to why I'm interested?
Yes.
I'm just curious how we know that these landed in mailboxes or not. Because that's, whether it was printed and delivered and whether it was drafted and printed versus hit the actual recipient or not, I think there's some way, so there's no way for us to really know that specifically.
Am I supposed to hand these to anybody?
I don't object if you hand them to the chair for her to review and make a decision on whether to pass it around. I think that's precisely my point, that they shouldn't be admitted because there's no evidence that they hit a mailbox.
There's no evidence of any of these invoices. They're not original copies. They're not. So every piece of evidence we've had then is not evidence.
I'd say yes. Sure.
So I have a question, Mr. Hicks. Where's the envelope for the letter?
The person that gave it to me did not have did not retain the envelope. By the way, the letter, I would testify as I've received most of those, and the letter I received, but I didn't keep a copy of it. Because I live in the district.
Okay, but those aren't yours.
No, those are from people that brought them to me. Who had received them and kept the copies.
He's had to strike his comments in response to
Just responding to the question.
No, I just asked about the envelope. I just asked about the
And I think
envelope.
that's the problem with him producing them and saying, here they are. I can't ask the recipient, did you get it, when you got it? Why did you keep it for 2.5 years? So,
That's from my wife erased them off of there, so it changed the texture a little bit.
How do you erase them off of it?
My wife's a professional artist. They have erasers that take off the ink.
Oh, take off the ink?
That erase the ink for the addresses, because as I said, the people that get it would be more concerned.
All right. So you're saying these came through a mailbox?
Yeah, it's been through 2 individuals.
That's impressive. All right.
You saw the letter as well.
What's impressive is that people save this kind of stuff. So I know I toss it.
Yeah.
And it's my recycle box as soon as I can walk to get it there.
It may be appropriate to have a short recess and the commissioners discuss among themselves the outstanding issues. No. Oh, that would make sense.
Do what?
I say that would make sense, but if you're not permitted to do it.
No.
Mr. Director, I should know this, but as far as construing the evidence, that would be appropriate in the motion to dismiss, but there's no construing the evidence against the unnamed and Director Burns. Is that correct?
I think you do, because it's a matter of assessing whether there has been sufficient evidence provided by the people.
But it's not construing the evidence against one party or the other.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're assessing the evidence,
Assessing.
correct, that's all you're doing, is assessing the evidence. I misunderstood that part.
Could you explain that?
You're not looking at it, in a motion to dismiss, you essentially favor the presentation of evidence from, in this case, from the complainant, and you look at it in favor of him and more or less not taking into consideration the respondent's position. But if you're acting on the directed verdict, and so, you kind of say, okay, in a directed verdict, you assess the totality of the evidence presented, taking into consideration what it is that the respondent may have also provided to a cross, essentially, because he hasn't provided any other evidence.
So I'm not a lawyer, I'm just looking on my phone, but isn't the standard of review in a directed verdict that the evidence most favorable to the plaintiff must be accepted as true? So a directed verdict would say that if all the evidence I provided was true, then there still would not have been a basis to find guilt or, so that I think the standard by me just looking it up here, but there's a couple lawyers here, and a directed verdict would be that if giving me the favorability that the evidence was true, that still would not have manifest a violation.
That's fair.
If the evidence is believed.
No, if the assumption is that it's true, that's what it said, I just read off. The assumption being that if the plaintiff's evidence were true, it would not provide a basis in finding a guilty verdict or a violation.
Okay, it's before the commission.
In hopes of, moving this forward, hopefully having this case end at some point prior to 2024. My view, certainly of this motion, would be to deny it. I think that it's just based on R.J. Mancini's testimony, and he said that he performed work for district campaign. He did door knocking, and he was compensated for it by the Republican Party. I do not believe that Mrs. Schmidt was aware of it, but nonetheless, my understanding would be that whether we find a violation or not, there needs to be an amendment where that amount is determined and an amendment to the report filed. So I don't see how we could dismiss the complaint and do a direct verdict based on that alone. Also, based on the testimony of Mr. Caraway, actually, today was opposite to, at least, and I will acknowledge it's been a month and a half, and I may not be remembering his testimony perfectly, but I remember Mr. Goldstein testifying that he was unable to produce any proof whatsoever on any of these. That when we heard today, and Representative Schmidt testified that there wasn't knowledge of this, wanted it to go away, and there was a settlement negotiated, right? That's how I remember it, and I could be remembering it wrong. That's one of the challenges with having this extended over, right, several weeks. So if that is the case, and perhaps it's not, that's how I remember it, then you would have this remaining balance that, again, now would be contributed, I guess, by doing the negotiated settlement. You're kind of acknowledging that something needed to be paid. So, I mean, at least based on what I know, my inclination is to, almost violations for good cause, that with a request to amend the reports as would be required legally to create those. I certainly don't believe there was anything done purposely or to try to skirt walk. I mean, I think this was a really weird mistake, but from what I understand, I do think there are a couple of amendments that will be required. So again, love to hear others' perspective. I acknowledge, I may not be remembering every testimony perfectly, and apologies if I'm remembering something incorrectly. But certainly at this point, I don't see the support for directed verdict and dismissal.
I'll take this place in order. You're supposed to, or we are supposed to bring, to bear what we've experienced in life and professions and things like that. So, I was a candidate. I know this world well. I'm sure you remember this world well. What the candidate needs to be told, you have the same contributions. I'm not sure that R.J. Mancini is saying that he did door knocking, and I think her testimony was she had no idea that anybody else was doing anything else. So I don't see that as a problem. Now, it's not R.J. Mancini's responsibility, it's the Republican Party, where he's working for to send out that in kind, not to get the candidate guess at that. Because we have door knocking all the time with people who show up on volunteer time and things like that, or work for the caucus, and they help us. The disputed, settlement thing, I look at that, it is interesting, but it's not as if Constant Content forgave anything. And if they did, that would be Constant Content's problem, not the recipient of that. But, it's a disputed amount, it was a contested amount. It was an amount that the candidate said, we don't know this, show this that we did, and they couldn't apparently even together very little testimony about, the details in there, but it's not a forgiven amount, in my view. There are other things in here, that I look at, and it's, it's like that, those sort of things happen, but the candidate who's responsible for what he knows. There's one. However, it's my question to Director Richter was, how do we do this? And it is construing the evidence most strongly in favor of the complainant. And if that is true, then we have to take out for the moment the balancing of the evidence. We have to suggest that those arguments and that evidence is construed most strongly in the complainant's favor. So for that reason, I would be in favor of denying the direct verdict at this point in time.
Yeah, I'll just weigh in, and I think for me, and I appreciate both those comments because I was very uncomfortable about the directed verdict. But I think the one thing that stuck out to me was kind of the Mancini piece. I don't know if I fully understand the on the information you got, the write-off of the excess content. What's the name, Grace? Constant content. But I think the Mancini piece as well. And I guess as I view it, I think whether you're a candidate or not, if you get the information really at any point in time, you have that ability to amend. So I would be at this point really weighing in on kind of the motion or the motion to deny this motion.
Any comments, Mr.
I have some questions, but I don't know if this is the appropriate time based on this motion, so. Just from Mr. Director, so I don't know what Peter said. But how do you know when a debt is a debt, Bill?
I don't know that there's anything that specifically identifies it, but certainly you would have to be, I think, as a person that is involved in the activity, you have to know in some manner or form that you are obligated to make that payment, like a mortgage on your house.
But I mean, so you have a situation, could be any of us, so we contract for something. And now we have the contractor says you owe X, this amount, 39,000, and we say, well, we don't know that, we owe 20,000 some change because we didn't provide the service.
Right.
So just because a contractor tells you, and obviously there's no, what was that you called it before? You were talking to Mr. Carroll.
Oh, engagement agreement.
Yeah, there's no engagement agreement. So how do you know? I mean, I've run campaigns too, and, things can fluctuate, or they don't do what they say they're gonna do. So do I now have a responsibility to pay them? I don't think I do. I don't think, I guess when you look at it overall, I still have a responsibility to my campaign and my fund, and the people that donated to that. So I have to do my due diligence and be prudent and proper rules, right? That's how I look at it. So that's just a question about a debt is a debt. Because there is a question when you look at the corporation. I know what Mr. Hicks presented, and I would, looking just at it, I would agree with him. However, after looking at the evidence, I don't necessarily agree with that. I know I'm supposed to be talking about the directed verdict, so I would not be in favor of a directed verdict at this point. I'd rather have us deliberate, because there's other issues out there, like, and I think Mr. O'Brien said that if Ms. Schmidt knew, this goes back to the knowingly standard, about R.J. Mancini, that she then would correct that. So now the question I have to you, so there's a complaint file. We have the respondent. Did they, during this long hearing that we've had over the year, nobody's fault, that it's extended, is there a responsibility of a respondent or a candidate if they find out information during the hearing before it's concluded? Does the law say that they now have to amend the report? That's his argument, that's what I'm asking.
I don't think the law really speaks to it, and there's certainly, it's one thing to come into certain knowledge, but is that knowledge an actual identification of an event that needs to be reflected in the
Before hearing.
before the hearing is concluded, that makes a final determination on that factual issue, or presumed factual.
No,
I mean, especially given that it has been a while since this all took place. It was during COVID. I think everybody was probably, my mind is still following COVID. In Mr. Hicks' document, it says first claim 1 of 7 days was spent on Schmidt and Freeman, and then revise it to 10%. Does he really know? You know what I mean? Or is it just a kid who's scared, who's sitting up here? I'm not excusing, or, he said what he said. But I'm just saying, where is the accuracy? Where do we actually, how does he know what to report to whomever so that, Representative Schmidt can actually correctly amend a report? It seems like there's, to your point, there's a lot of time that's gone by on this, so it makes it difficult for everything to get nailed down so that everybody's compliant in a way that I feel that you would want to be. I feel that you try to put the things in it that you knew of, and if you didn't, then whatever. But again, that's just how do you know what to say? How do you know what to put down? How do you know what's accurate, what's inaccurate after 2.5 years? It makes it very blurry.
And then we also have an affidavit from Rob Seacon, Executive Director of Ohio Republican Party. His affidavit, the truth, I'm assuming it is, says that R.J. Mancini, any other person, did not specifically assign them to volunteer work with Gene Schmidt.
But Commissioner Lau, if you recall, they sent, the ORP sent resources to GPL to work under GPL's direction. It was Tommy Rolfe and GPL who sent Mancini to Freeman, and so GPL got resources ORP was paying for, so he was directed by Tommy Rolfe to do this work. The ORP, as I understand it, should have informed the campaign of that in time, and that did not happen. So Rob's affidavit is accurate. They didn't direct him.
I got you.
They directed him to work for GPL, who directed him. So it's not, it's kind of misleading to be blunt.
It's all like pure facts where.
Well, it's truthful.
Yeah,
It's
it's truthful,
Is
but
that
but there's overlap.
So anyway, I have a bunch of questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I already asked them.
Oh, okay. I thought I interrupted, I apologize.
No, you didn't interrupt me.
I'm sorry.
But I would be of the mind to object to the directed verdict.
motion?
Anyways,
Well, I don't know if I can speak on something and make a motion.
Everybody else has spoken.
Yeah.
So we're going to deny the motion.
But I mean, you really shouldn't speak on a motion and then
So so what we're saying is, someone's making a motion to deny the motion for a directed verdict and to dismiss the complaint.
I will move to deny respondent's motion for a directed verdict and or to dismiss the complaint.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. That's been duly seconded. Mr. Director, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Weil,
and I want to make sure.
motion
I'm
is to
clear.
deny the motion for directed verdict. And change it, right, and motion dismiss.
Well, the motion isn't yet to dismiss.
To deny the directed motion, it's to deny the motion for directed verdict and or the motion to dismiss.
That's how it's stated
It's a
on.
procedural
Okay,
term. It means nothing about what happens at the end of the case. Sorry.
I would say,
Ms. Hagan?
Aye.
Mr. Stouffer?
Yes.
Mr. Walton?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Chair Kaufman? Okay, the motion for directed verdict and the motion to dismiss is denied. Mr. O'Brien, you can put your case on.
Okay, thank you.
It's a procedural question. I had hoped that this would be over today, but is there a timetable on it? I have a meeting in Cincinnati at 7. I'd like to be able to be back by 7, so.
We all have things that we have to
Okay.
get done too, so I have a board meeting, she has a meeting with, school personnel. Let's do that.
I always thought these really important.
hey,
You do.
that's true.
Okay.
I still have other important meetings.
That's important. Okay.
Thank you. If you could swear the witness, this is Curtis Mayhew. Sir, will you state your full name for the record?
Kurt Mayhew.
And Mr. Mayhew, during your government employment, were you ever employed by the Secretary of State's office?
I was.
And when did you start there?
January 7th, 1990.
And who was the Secretary of State?
Sherry Brown.
And you worked for Sherrod Brown through the balance of his term?
I did.
And who was the next Secretary of State you worked for?
Bob Taft.
Bob Taft. Did you work through his 8 years as Secretary of
I
State?
did.
And did you stay under the succeeding Secretary of State?
I did.
And that was
Ken Blackwell.
in Blackwell. And after his term, the following Secretary of State, who was that?
I was retained by Jennifer Bruder during her 4-year term.
And so far, these are both Republican and Democrat elected Secretary of State,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And after Jennifer Brunner, did you stay in the employ of John Houston, who became Secretary of State?
I did. I served through his first of 2 terms.
And when did you leave the Secretary of State's office?
In mid 2015.
And during your time with the Secretary of State's office, did you hold a position at all with respect to campaign finance?
I did.
Can you tell the Elections Commission what that was?
When Secretary Taft was elected, he put a focus on campaign finance and established a small unit that eventually grew into a larger unit. I was in that unit from its beginning in 1992. And I led that unit from 1998 until I left in 2015.
And we've heard the name Brian Katz throughout these proceedings, who's the Director of Campaign Finances, the Secretary of State's office currently. Is that the position that you were in during
Yes.
the time you described?
Yeah, yes.
And I take it by that background in employment, you're familiar with campaign finance requirements under Ohio law. And in fact, you're familiar with the operations of this commission as well, correct?
I am.
And in terms of reporting in-kind contributions, must a candidate know about an in-kind contribution before they have an obligation to report?
Certainly.
And how typically would a campaign or a candidate know about a in-kind contribution that anyone may make?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, they can only report what they know. In fact, I know that when we would do training seminars, we would often get questions about, hey, look, I understand a friend of mine mailed out some letters or some things like that. I'm hearing that happened, but how do I report that? My advice was you don't have any duty to report something that you didn't coordinate with the other party.
And can you report something in an unknown amount if someone has provided in-kind contributions to your campaign and you learn about them? If you're unaware of what amount to report, what should you do?
I don't know that there's anything to report until you have some sort of dollar figure. And if it's not something that was done with your consent or coordination, I'm not sure you have an obligation to disclose it.
And Mr. Stephen Caraway, who testified previously, talked about reporting in-kind contributions that are quote unquote measurable. Can you tell us what that concept is?
Well, you know, with the campaign finance law, it requires you to be specific about the dollar amounts for contributions that are received, whether they're cash or kind. There are a lot in a campaign. There are a lot of undetermined valuations of help that you can get. You have someone who has a convertible and you want to use it in a parade. You know, you just happen to have a friend with a convertible willing to set you up in a parade. I don't know that you can automatically conclude that that's an in-kind contribution.
And did I ask you to look at a series of documents in this case in connection with a man named R.J. Mancini?
Yes.
And R.J. Mancini was on the payroll of the Ohio Republican Party. Was that pay stubs that you reviewed?
I believe that's the case, yes.
And Rob Seclar, also from the Ohio Republican Party at the time, testified that he did put him on the payroll and in-kinded his payroll to the House Republican Campaign Committee. If you assume that to be the case and the evidence, whose obligation would it be to notify the candidate?
The candidate?
Whose obligation would it be to notify the candidate that there was an in-kind contribution to their campaign?
If there's an identifiable amount, I would say it would be the House caucus.
And if you assume that the House caucus did not or failed to report to the candidate the in-kind contribution that they received from ORP to benefit the candidate, would the candidate have a duty to report something they had not been notified about?
I can't see how they no.
And would, during your time at the Secretary of State's office, would you file a complaint with this commission under those kinds of circumstances?
No, not at all.
And in terms of campaign consulting, if someone hires a campaign consulting firm and there are multiple people employed by that firm, typically are there campaign finance law require them to allocate each individual employee and what amount of time they spend and what amount that was paid when making reports to that candidate?
No.
And if we look at campaign consultants, are you generally familiar with their billing procedures in terms of covering overhead?
No, I couldn't say that.
So you're not involved in that at all?
No.
If a corporation which did provide services to a candidate invoices that candidate and the candidate questions whether all the services were provided, what should they do in that circumstance?
Well, just like any other transaction, they can always dispute the charges or ask for some sort of itemization or explanation of the written bill. Happen pretty frequently, frankly.
And what duty is it on the candidate then to report when there's a questionable or contested invoice that's received from a vendor?
Typically, I think the dispute would get wrapped up within the time frame of a reporting period. So I don't know that I would see a lot of back and forth just within one report. But if the dispute lasted for a time, then they could report it as an outstanding debt. Or what I would typically advise a campaigning committee to do would be to enter it as a debt, but sort of disclaim it as this is in dispute, but I'm reporting it out of good faith just to ensure that it's part of the record.
And did you look at the Dunning letter that attorney Dave Goldstein sent to the Schmidt campaign in this case?
Yes.
And totaled around $39,000.
Right, the
And
initial invoice.
The initial invoice, and then there were communications back and forth. Did you see via email and handwritten notes with Mr. Goldstein and the Schmidt committee? Did you see those communications? And did you see the report that then was filed for $20,360 at the Secretary of State's office, first as a debt and then as a payment of an outstanding debt?
Yes.
And from looking at those documents, do you have an opinion whether or not the Schmidt campaign properly handled that billing, if we want to call it that, from Attorney Goldstein?
I do.
And what would that opinion be then?
Well, my opinion is that it was something that was resolved in the normal course of the campaign. I mean, I think it was disclosed properly from the beginning and then completed properly.
Would you consider a negotiated settlement of a disputed bill from a vendor that results in a settlement? Would you consider that as a corporate contribution?
Nope.
Yeah. And tell the commission why.
Well, in this particular set of facts that I reviewed, the invoice originally submitted, or the invoices originally paid by the campaign committee for mailers 1 through 7, I think that they were numbered, among other things, that when Mr. Goldstein followed up after the fact to collect the debt, he included a lot of things that the committee had already paid for. And so then the follow-up after that didn't have any detail. It got shorter in terms of what it contained for the 20,000. But at each iteration, at least from my calculations, it looked like that, frankly, the Schmidt campaign overpaid for the services that Constant Contact provided. Ultimately, in the amount of about $1,000, I think my math was correct.
And did you look at the original invoice from Constant Content that totaled $164,334?
I do remember seeing that.
Did you compare that with the invoices from Strategic Media and make any observations about markups?
I saw the document from Strategic, but I didn't make any conclusion on looking at it. I assumed that there was some professional interaction between Constant Content and Strategic.
Okay, if you assume that there was a subcontractor kind of relationship between Strategic Media and Constant Content, and Strategic Media invoiced Constant Content and paid an invoice, and then Constant Content then invoiced the Schmidt campaign, would that be the process that you were asked to look at?
Yes, I mean, it did look like there was that professional relationship that the Schmidt campaign entered into with Constant Content. Constant Content had Strategic and maybe some other subcontractors for some of the services they provided to the Schmidt campaign. But I didn't see a direct correlation. At least I don't recall.
And is it normal when you hire a campaign consultant as a in an election that that campaign consultant is equipped to do everything that needs to be done to run a campaign, or do they functionally subcontract that to others?
It is altogether normal for a campaign consultant firm, of which there are many, to provide a whole host of services to their client. Some wrap everything up in one bill. Some may send invoices to pay for the campaign to pay for those subcontractors. But either one is appropriate.
Okay, I have no other questions, Madam Chairman. Mr. Hicks here will have some questions.
It's Mr. Mayhew. What's your name again?
Kurt Mayhew,
Kurt Mayhew.
M-A-Y-H-E-W.
Okay, and was it correct that I hear correctly? We've never met before, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and did I hear that you left the Secretary of State's office in 2015 was the year I heard?
I did.
Okay, and what do you do now?
I was asked by a friend to come and help him as he began his term as a registrar of motor vehicles. So I was in the Department of Public Safety under the registrar Don Pettit at the time, and have served as chief of staff at the DMV since June of 2015.
Okay, and prior to that, did you work at a DMV or?
No. In fact, I was asked to come specifically to bring a fresh perspective on how the DMV conducts its business.
Okay, but you had no prior employment or other experience with the DMV? Other than getting your driver's license like me?
Aside from being a user, which, I steel myself to improve the process.
Okay, and with your you had a pretty impressive long run in the Secretary of State's office. It's a pretty different thing from Secretary of State's office to DMV. What was how did that come about? You mentioned a friend or something like that.
Yeah, the registrar, when Don Pettit was named registrar under the CASIC, second CASIC administration, I had known Don for some time, worked with him in his role at the Inspector General's office, and he was looking for someone to come in and take a fresh look at how they did, what they did, and whether or not it was even necessary, some of the things that the DMV was doing, some of its processes.
So this case in particular, do you have any personal knowledge of the case?
Aside from the documents that Mr. O'Brien provided to me, no,
Okay, did you talk with Mr. Goldstein?
never have.
Did you talk with Ms. Schmidt?
Just today,
Did you talk to Mr. Caraway?
no,
Have you ever met Mr. Caraway?
I have not.
Did you talk to RJ Mancini?
Nope.
Would you say that your testimony today here is as an expert, that that's why you're being presented? You don't work,
I think so. I mean, the campaign finance statutes haven't changed much in terms of what, as a regulator, what I would be expecting to see either in the course of the filing or the follow-up audit process.
Okay. Have you ever been a candidate for office?
I have not.
Have you ever been a treasurer for a campaign?
I have, once.
Okay, can you describe that and when it took place?
Again, I served as a treasurer for a friend who was running for township trustee office on the western side of Franklin County.
And that would have been a nonpartisan election, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so concepts like pre-primary, post-primary, I think apply differently.
Yeah, it depends on when the candidate's name is on the ballot, yes.
So would you consider yourself an expert at the statutes relating to campaign finance?
I would leave that to someone else's characterization, but I do know them, I practiced in it. The book that the Secretary of State's office still has on their website, I wrote. So I do have knowledge.
So my question was, do you consider yourself to be an expert?
I consider myself to be very knowledgeable.
Okay, have you been, other than the one time you served as a treasurer, has anybody else asked you to be a treasurer?
No.
You spoke to Mr. O'Brien's questions about how it works for hiring a campaign consultant firm and the services that they perform and so on and so forth. Have you ever hired a campaign consulting firm?
Never.
Have you ever worked with a campaign consulting firm?
No.
Have you ever been a campaign consulting firm?
No.
So can you help me to understand how you would feel that you know how campaign consulting firms work if you've never been one, you've never hired one, and you've never worked with one?
Well, certainly my understanding is limited, only with respect to how they are billed and how they're paid by campaign committees. In terms of seeing it on the disclosure side, and if disputes arise, which they do, between a campaign committee and any vendor, frankly, whether it's a campaign consultant or the person who's making their yard signs, just advising them how to comply with the disclosure statute.
Have you ever been on the Ohio Election Commission?
I have not.
Have you been, or I guess if you're with all that experience, how often would you say you were a witness in an Ohio Election Commission matter?
This is my first.
Are you being compensated for your time today?
Absolutely not.
Okay. How do you know Mr. O'Brien or the respondent?
I know Mr. O'Brien as in his time as a county prosecutor. I am a constituent of his, but in terms of Mrs. Representative Schmidt, I have no interaction.
So when you were in the Secretary of State's office, were you involved in any complaints submitted on behalf of the Secretary of State to the Ohio Election Commission?
I often signed a lot of complaints to the Elections Commission over the years. So yes.
So one of the things that Mr. O'Brien said a couple times here, I don't know if you were in the room when he said it, is he uses the term knowingly.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe for me, based on your knowledge of the statutes, how the term knowingly applies to the allegations here?
In terms of my understanding of the statute, I think the plain language of knowingly I'm not an attorney, but the plain language would mean that whoever is being referred to, the Elections Commission for an alleged violation would have to have known about. And not just mere knowledge, but I would, other parts of the statute require consent and coordination for certain contributions to be even considered contributions.
Okay, so as it pertains to this particular charge, I'm looking here, can you cite a statute that you think for sure that the actual word knowingly appears in and what context?
No.
Relating to campaign finance. If I told you that election falsification was such a statute that has knowingly as part of it?
I would not be in a position to dispute it.
Okay, so, because actually what I'm actually looking at is that the term knowingly is in it is in a few places in the statute, 3517.13, which is failure to complete an accurate statement, but it's only in certain cases in that statute, in particular situations. Are you familiar with when knowingly applies to failure to file a complete and accurate statement and when it doesn't?
Trying to recall. I could not recall. I didn't separate for long enough. When it comes to, drafting complaints with the Elections Commission.
So I don't know the best approach to this, but in that statute that is under consideration here, so in this case, are you familiar with statute 3517.13 B, C, and D, and what the distinction is between those?
I couldn't tell you today.
What kind of reporting is typically required of a candidate, timeframe wise?
Well, a candidate, if money is raised and spent by a candidate, you have to have a campaign committee to do that and to disclose through. And based upon the level of activity and the presence of the candidate's name on a particular ballot, then you have pre-election, post-election reports, and others that may be required depending upon what office is being sought and whether or not the campaign committee continues in existence.
So I apologize, I'm trying to read the statute because I'm not being fair to you with your answers. In your answer, did you mention things like pre-primary, post-primary, semi-annual, annual?
Not by name, but yes, those are the periodic reports dependent upon level of activity, office being sought, and the candidate's name appearing on the ballot.
So let's say that a candidate filed a report A and then became aware of an error on the report or something being omitted from the report that they were not aware of when they filed the report. Do they have a duty to update that report?
There is an amendment process.
That's not the question I asked. I asked, do they have a duty to
Well,
An answer to their process. I asked, did they have a duty to update that report? Yes or no?
If it meets the terms of a contribution received or an expenditure made, yes.
So just for a scenario, if I said, let's say you ran for office, okay, and I told you, hey, I paid to do a mailer for you, and then I walk away. What's your duty as a candidate in that situation?
It's a good question. I would, personally, I would ask what the value is so I could properly report it, but I'm not sure that that's, that kind of running down of that information is absolutely necessary. Candidates have supporters that do a lot of things on their behalf. And, you know, writing a personal letter to friends to advocate for the election or defeat of somebody or an issue isn't automatically an in-kind contribution. Your supporters retain their First Amendment rights to advocate for an election, whichever direction they want it to go.
But isn't there a distinction there between a personal First Amendment right, you being an expert at this, or very knowledgeable, a First Amendment right like I do this, versus I get a group of people together and we do that?
Well, yeah, you know, candidates campaign committee that does that sort of thing would report it as a normal function of their existence.
But I'm just saying, is there not a significant distinction in campaign finance laws between an individual acting on their own outside of any coordination with the candidate or any other individuals, which is, I think, then, you know, free, that's a First Amendment issue, versus an individual or group working with a candidate?
A group, certainly. I think a group changes the nature of that communication. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's an in-kind contribution. They could have, you could have independent expenditures that a group could make.
So let's say that, but those would still be reportable, right? Independent?
By that group, yes.
Okay. So, but let's say you were running for office and I came to you and said, I'm Chris Hicks Consulting and I get paid by somebody to do consulting services for candidates like you. And then I perform those services and then I walk away. What do you think the duty of the candidate is in that situation?
So you're performing services for me?
Yeah.
At someone else's behest?
That somebody else is paying me for. I come to you and I say, hey, somebody else is paying me to do services for great guys like you. So I'm gonna do some services to help you on your campaign. And then when your campaign's over, let's say I just walk away. What duty do you feel a candidate has?
None.
So you don't think a candidate has any legal obligation to do care, due diligence, anything?
I don't think a candidate can control what someone else is doing, especially, again, going back to working in coordination and with the consent of the candidate. Just because you're doing it on their behalf doesn't make it disclosable by the campaign committee, in my judgment.
So you're saying in your judgment, as an expert or close to an expert, that if I decide I want to do this and have somebody paying me and go tell candidates that I'm providing services somebody else is paying me, none of those candidates have any responsibility to any due diligence to try to ascertain what that amount is, what the cost is, or to file any sort of reporting?
It'd be a stretch.
It'd be a stretch that they would have any due diligence, or?
Well, you know, I'm looking at this in practical terms. If I were the candidate, yeah, I'd want to know more about this activity that's going on, but I can't do anything to stop it. I didn't ask to initiate it. It'd be very difficult for me to feel obligated to disclose such things, because I really didn't have any.
Or to try to ascertain what they were.
Well, again, I would pursue it. I would want to know more, but I'm not sure that even if I found out more, that I would have a duty to disclose that activity.
So I want to hit on some particular, so the statute at hand here is, in this case, is 351713. Did you review that statute before your testimony today?
Did I review it today? No. I mean, and not.
Pertaining to this case, did you review it?
No, not specifically. No, I know that those are generally a list of prohibitions in the statute.
Not at all. But do you, so you were testifying here today in a case where those are the specific statutes raised, but you did not review the statute prior to your testimony?
No, I reviewed the complaint and the disclosures that were provided.
Okay. So 3517.13B, and I'm going to read this one, and the other two are almost identical, so I can interpolate them. No campaign committee shall fail to file a complete and accurate statement required under Division A1 of this section, 351710 of the revised code. And then the C and D, the only difference is they refer to, instead of referring to Division A1, they refer to Division A2, and then D refers to Division A3 and A4. So what do you think that those mean? No campaign committee, if they need it, I can let you have my computer to see it if you'd like, but no campaign committee shall fail to file a complete and accurate statement required under division, and there's different divisions in these different parts, of section 3517.10 of the revised code.
That they have to file a true and accurate statement of the money that they raised, the money they spent, the other contributions that they received as part of their overall mission to get their candidate elected.
So just by comparison, part of this that is not part of this case would be section E of that same statute, and it reads, no person other than a campaign committee shall knowingly fail to file a statement required under section 351710 of the revised code. And that's fail to file versus complete and accurate. Okay. Being that you had all this experience, why would you think the legislature would have certain parts of this actually have the word knowingly and certain parts not have the word knowingly?
I have no idea.
But you would agree, I mean, I could, like I said, I could give you my computer to look at the statute. That the BCD where I read B and then just told you that the word knowingly doesn't appear there, so no campaign committee shall fail to file a complete and accurate statement required under Division A1 of Section 12 of the law of the Rights Code. Would you agree that the word knowingly is not in that part of the statute?
Take your word for it.
Would you like to look at it on my computer? Okay, so why would you think from a policy standpoint, the word knowingly might not be included in and is not included in those pieces?
I don't know.
Do you think one reason might be that it would prevent candidate rope-a-dopes to say, well, I didn't know, so I didn't have a duty to do anything?
I have no clue.
Do you think that a culture in which candidates could just say, I didn't know, even if the person told me I'm doing compensated professional services for you, I didn't know, and then take no steps to ascertain? Do you think that would be good public policy in Ohio? Let me ask that first, and then I have a second question to that. Do you think that's good public policy?
Yes, I'll leave it to the legislature.
Well, do you think that's consistent with the statute? The word knowingly is not in the statute, so do you think that is consistent with the statute, that a candidate can say that it's okay that I didn't file a complete and accurate statement because it wasn't knowingly? Even though the word knowingly is specifically not in those parts of the statute, but in other parts of the statute.
I don't have an opinion on that. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be up to this commission to determine. But,
well, you're here as an expert. on these matters that help the
Yeah.
commission.
Well, you know, from what I've seen of the three things, that the complaint, the original complaint, as I read it, I'm here to say that I don't think that the Schmidt campaign failed to file a complete and accurate statement. I don't think that they accepted a corporate contribution. And the third one's not coming to me, but of the three things that are alleged, I don't see how anyone could conclude that they violated the statutes.
Because you don't think that, for example, R.J. Mancini, that there's anything that should have been shown as in kind for him?
He was paid, right, by the ORP. That was in kind to the House caucus. The caucus exists to get members elected, and they hire a lot of people. Do I think that they have to delineate to the dollar every person they hire to a particular campaign committee? No.
Is there any statutory basis for that statement? I'm not aware of any, so I'm wondering if you're aware of any statutory basis to, that you can have compensated people but not delineate them to the campaign.
Well, it'd be similar to going to Walmart and buying some things. Am I going to get the hourly wage for the people who stocked the shelves, who ran the checkout to produce this receipt that I paid for out of campaign funds? I mean, at some point, the existence of the caucus committees is to get their people elected or reelected. And they hire people to do that. If the legislature wants that sort of delineation, they could enact statutes that would require it. I don't know of anything that would require that kind of itemization.
But I'm confused by your Walmart example. If I went to buy something at Walmart, if I put it in campaign context, if I were door knocking as a volunteer, there's a big difference between that and I'm door knocking because I'm being paid. And if I buy something at Walmart, the notion, I don't understand the basis of the example that maybe you thought that, somebody could maintain that I should figure out what the employee's cost is that stock the shelves.
Hey, you have a campaign volunteer at a parade to go buy a lot of candy to pass out. Does that all of a sudden wrap Walmart up in some sort of vast?
Well, but if
itemization?
If the campaign volunteer bought candy at Walmart and the candy cost $100, okay, is not that something, the $100, something that the campaign is obligated to in kind?
As soon as they're aware of it, yes.
Okay, so what does that have to do with the wages of the people stocking the shelves at Walmart?
Well, Walmart's a vendor. In this case, I think the Ohio House Republican Campaign Committee is a vendor, and a very intimate vendor with their clients, their candidates. But again, if the legislature wanted that level of detail, they could require it. And I don't know of anything that compels the caucus, the party, or a campaign committee to provide that level of detail.
Well, I'm looking right now on my screen, I'm glad to show it to you, the campaign finance handbook, and it says you have to have that detail. So it says anything of value other than my blah, 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 we can pull this up. We don't have a screen here, but it has to be recorded.
I think the Schmidt campaign reported in-kind contributions from the caucus. But even if they didn't, I think the caucus has a duty to elect its members.
So that duty would mean, since they have a duty to elect its members, they don't have to follow campaign finance laws?
Well,
Jack, that isn't what you testified to.
yeah. And
We can clarify what he exactly just said.
I don't know that, at least in that particular case, Mr. Mancini was known to be working for the Schmidt campaign. I would have to refer to the candidate or her campaign committee.
Did you review the testimony from prior hearings of this case?
No, just well, I did see testimony from Secor, but my focus was the complaint and the exhibits that were provided.
But you saw that by video, watching the video or something, or?
No, I saw a printout.
I don't believe there's any transcripts for this hearing thus far.
Well, maybe I'm. Oh, yes, the affidavit. I didn't watch any video. Maybe an affidavit.
Did you seek to talk to Mr. Sikora?
No.
Before coming here today? Okay. In that blue book behind you there, is it blue? Those are different exhibits.
I've got about 10 minutes.
There's little white tabs that are different dates. One has an error, but it says 7/23. And in that, right there where that 7/23 tab is, there's an exhibit A. And then back in the back of this, there's under where it says RESP, which means respondent. There's exhibit 11 back there. Each of those are invoices from Constant Content. Are you able to locate those? So one is exhibit B, that's under that tab that says 7/23. It's the very first thing. Exhibit A, I'm sorry, exhibit A under that tab. And the other one is exhibit 11.